السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. معاكم مستر سامح عبد الهادي، والنهاردة بنعمل لكم summary وريفيجن على A Doll's House Act 1 و Act 2 until page 50. At the very beginning we are talking about the plot of the play and the summary. The play is about a normal family, the husband Torval Helmer and his wife Nora Helmer. At the beginning we find that Nora returns home buying different things for her children. She has bought presents and gifts and different things for the maids and the house. Nora appears so excited because of the coming year and the new year and the celebration of the coming year and so on. يبقى في بداية القصة بتاعتنا بنلاقي ان نورا بترجع البيت وبتكون مشترية حاجات كتيرة جدا للبيت، الكريسماس تري، هدايا للأطفال استعدادا لبداية العام الجديد أو الاحتفال بالعام الجديد. نورا at the beginning might appear to be extravagant or spendthrift. يعني نورا في الأول ممكن تبدو بالنسبة لنا إن هي مبذرة. Especially in that situation. She buys different things and gives the porter extra money. That's why her husband blames her for wasting his money, as if the money is burning in her hands. He calls her all the time that she's spendthrift, spending money carelessly, as if it's burning in her hands, or she's burning the money. She doesn't keep hold of the money or doesn't care about the money. بنلاقي ان نورا هيلمر بيلومها طول الوقت ان هي spending money carelessly, buying different things. She doesn't care about the importance of money or how he gets such money and so on. فبيبدأ ان هو blaming her all the time and calling her spendthrift or wasteful. ده في البداية بس بتظهر لنا نورا كشخصية irresponsible أو مش مهتمية بقيمة الفلوس أو إن هي مبذرة أو مسرفة. لكن طبعا by passing of time we are going to discover that appearance always deceive. إن المظاهر دايما بتخدع وإن نورا is a responsible wife، وده اللي هنشوفه مع بعض. هنلاقي برضو إن هيلمر used to call his wife using animal pets. Songbird, singing bird, little squirrelkin, and so on, treating her like a child. I think that Helmer all the time wants to treat his wife as a child in order to feel that he is a father and to feel dominant، يعني يحس إن هو شخصية مسيطرة. Also he wants to feel that he is a upper hand in the house, controlling everything in the house. All the time he wants her to be his child, to be dependent to him. I think also that Nora wants to please the family. يعني نورا بتعمل كل دوت عشان سواء بتشتري حاجات للبيت أو للأطفال أو كده، إن هي عايزة يعني to create an atmosphere of happiness at the house. At the beginning of the new year, that doesn't mean that she was extravagant at all. Helmer says that she has inherited such trait from her father. It is in her blood. هيلمر بيقول ان هي ورثت الصفات ديت اللي هي being spendthrift from her father، وان ده in her blood. هيلمر tends to treat Nora like a child زي ما احنا قلنا، calling her using animal names and pets and so on, songbird, squirrel، وزي ما احنا قلنا ان هو using such names and treating her in that way to feel that he is dominant. And all the time he advised her not to eat macaroons, which is a kind of sweets. He wants to feel superior to her and wants her to be dependent to him. That's why he acts like a father. Helmer is against borrowing money. Whenever his wife asks him to borrow money or to buy on credit or something like that, he refuses the idea of borrowing money. He doesn't like being in debt. هو بيكره فكرة إن هو يكون مديون. He thinks that When a household depends on debts, it is something so bad. It's like slavery. وهنا هيلمر بيبدو كشخص حكيم ان هو بيرفض فكرة الديون او بيرفض فكرة ان هو borrowing money لان البيت او الهاوسhold if it relies on debts it's something bad and it is a vile. Again, Nora talks about the idea of or she ignored or she refused to accept the idea of eating macaroons as her husband all the time advised her not to eat macaroons. Being a father, as I have told you, they talk about it and Nora promised not to eat such macaroon again. They talk about Christmas night and inviting their friend Dr. Rank. ودكتور رانك دوت was a family friend to both Helmer and Nora. It will be a nice evening. Helmer thinks of his coming secure job, and such job will change their life completely. A secure job with good income. هنعرف بعد كده ان هيلمر at the beginning of their marriage was suffering a lot from working in jobs that didn't help him to live a good life. He was a lawyer and he didn't earn much money of being a lawyer. So now, at the beginning of a new year, he was about to get a good job, a good position, being a bank manager, and that will help them earn a lot of money, and that would change their life completely. Helmer remembers how Nora had shut herself in her room for 3 weeks, decorating the Christmas tree, and finally the cat distorted that Christmas tree. هو هنا بيفتكر معاها إن last year she shut herself in her room decorating the Christmas tree and that they suffered a lot. He suffered himself being alone. قال لها أنا كنت قاعد لوحدي وأنت كنت inside your room decorating the Christmas tree and finally we didn't find any Christmas tree as she said that the cat distorted it إن الكات دمرت الكريسماس tree. He felt so bored that time and he told her that she would never wear out her lovely eyes and fingers or hands again. خلاص نورا وهيلمر مش هيعانوا تاني earning a lot of money and they would buy the Christmas tree ready made and she would never wear out her eyes and lovely hands again. After that a new character would appear and she was called Mrs. Lindy, an old school friend. Mrs. Lindy, who was an old friend of Nora, arrives to Nora's house. Her husband has died and it seems that she has come to Nora to ask for help. Nora apologized for not writing to her after the death of her husband. Her husband has left her nothing. No money, no children, not even sad memories. هنا صديقة نورا مسز ليندي بتيجي البيت نورا وواضح ان هي جاية تطلب مساعدة. كانت ان هي متجوزة وجوزها مات ونورا بتعتذر لها ان هي ما كتبتلهاش لما جوزها مات. نورا tells her about her husband's new position as a bank manager. وبنلاحظ ان نورا بتبتدي تتكلم مع مسز ليندي وفي البداية she didn't give her a chance to express her problems أو the reason for coming to her house. لكن طبعا as a friend she was so excited to tell her friend Mrs. Lindy or Christine everything. فبنلاقي ان نورا خدت وقت كتير قوي ان هي تتكلم عن الفاميلي بتاعتها وهير هازبند والcircumstances at the beginning of their marriage. فبتقول لها ان her husband Helmer was a lawyer when being a lawyer was not a secure job and he wouldn't accept all the cases. But now he was about to be a bank manager and he would earn a lot of money and a good salary. And of course, that would change their life completely. They would be happy, no more worries, and they would buy whatever they want and need. Mrs. Lindy told Nora that she was still not grown up. She was so extravagant at school, and she was talking about the money as if she was a child. فنورة طبعا defended herself, telling her that she had to work at the beginning of their marriage, and she helped her husband. He didn't have or didn't earn much money. طب هنا نورة بقى بتدافع عن نفسها، بتقول لها انا مش طفلة ولا حاجة، بالعكس ده انا يعني suffered a lot with my husband at the beginning of our marriage and I helped him. بتقول لها ان هي يعني ساعدت جوزها. She worked hard so in sewing and embroidery. دي أعمال الخياطة وتطريز الملابس. To earn some money to help her husband. يبقى نورة هنا أول مرة بتدافع عن نفسها وبتظهر لنا عن شخصيتها الحقيقية إن هي how she supported and helped her husband at the beginning of their marriage. She worked in embroidery and sewing to earn money to help her husband. وبتكمل نورة القصة بتاعت حياتهم وإن إزاي إن هيلمر being so poor and didn't earn a lot of money had to work or to overwork until he broke down and became very ill. The doctor advised Nora to take him to Italy or to a warmer country in order to recover. They had to travel to Italy to help Torvald recover. Nora's father was dying at the same time, and Nora didn't have enough money. She asked her husband to borrow some money, but he refused. Then she told him that she borrowed the money from her father. She took him and helped him to recover, but unfortunately her father died at the same time. It was the worst time of her whole married life. فهنا نورا لما بتقول it was the worst time of my whole married life, she was referring to the bad time at which her husband was dying and he needed to travel to Italy to recover, and her husband at the same time was dying too, and she was pregnant expecting Ivar, their young son. فهنا طبعا ده كان the worst time in their whole married life, as at the same time her father died and she would never be able to see him again. Miss Lindy had to marry an old man as her mother was ill, and she had two younger brothers. She had to help them and look after her mother and her two younger brothers too. هنا ميسيس ليندي بيجي الدور عليها ان هي تتكلم عن نفسها وعن her past experience when her mother was very ill and she had two younger brothers. She sacrificed her love. She was in love with a man, but she left this man and married a rich old man to get money to help her mother and the two younger brothers. فده لو جه سألنا في الامتحان عن sacrificial rule دور التضحية هنلاقي ان ميسيس ليندي ضحت بحبها. She sacrificed her love to marry another man, not for the sake of money itself but to help her mother and the two younger brothers. When this man died he left her nothing as his business was shaking. يعني حتى الراجل ده لما مات didn't leave her any money لأن الشغل بتاعه كان going up and down, فطبعا shaking مهتز. he lost all his money before his death and left her nothing. After his death, Mrs. Lindy had to work in several jobs to continue helping her mother. اشتغلت بعد وفاة جوزها بعض الوظائف عشان تساعد أهلها وأمها. لكن now her mother is dead and her younger brothers have jobs as they have grown up. She feels empty now. هي حاسة بالفراغ as none left to live for and to work for. وهنا بتبدو شخصية ميسيس ليندي لما بتتكلم ان هي she feels selfish أو feels empty because she doesn't have anybody to work for or to live for. هنا she's idealistic character. She needed all the time to help others or to find someone to work for and to live for. Mrs. Lindy needed a job to help herself now. It is for her own survival, but that makes her feel selfish. She wants Nora to help her find her a job as her life is so difficult. Nora tells Mrs. Lindy that she can manage things and she's proud of herself as Mrs. Lindy. قالت لها لو كنت انت فخورة بنفسك انا كمان فخورة بنفسي. ونورا بتوعدها ان هي ممكن آه تساعدها وتلاقي لها وظيفة. لكن نورا هنا بتتكلم عن ان هي she managed things like Mrs. Lindy. As Mrs. Lindy was proud of herself, Nora was also proud of herself as she saved her husband's life. تقول لها انا انقذت حياة جوزي. وبتبتدي نورا started to reveal her secrets about borrowing money to save her husband's life. هي في الأول قالت لها إن هي she took the money from her father, but now she would confess everything, telling her or revealing her secrets that she borrowed money to save the life of her husband. She borrowed money from a stranger without her husband's permission. وطبعا at that time it was يعني forbidden for a woman to borrow money without her husband's permission. وده اللي بتأكده Mrs. Lindy إن a woman couldn't borrow money without her husband's permission. فنورا هنا بتبتدي إن هي تدافع عن نفسها وتثبت أكتر إن هي she was a responsible wife, borrowing money, helping her husband to travel to Italy, helping him to recover from his disease and to live or saving his life. نورا بتكمل بتحكي لها ان هي she decided not to tell Helmer that she helped him at that time because that would destroy their life. He was a man, he had pride. He wouldn't accept the idea that his wife helped him and that he owed her anything. يعني هي بتقول لها ان جوزي كرجل عنده كبرياء و being so proud wouldn't accept the idea that I saved his life or helped him and that would ruin their family or their house. فعشان كده قررت ان هي ما تقولوش ان هي ساعدته. She thought that she might tell him that secret later when she became old and no more beautiful as before, to make him feel that he could do something for her, to continue loving her. يعني هنا نورا بتقول ان هي she would tell her husband when she became old, when she's not smitten any longer in her. يعني ما يتوقف عن حبها لما تبقى كبيرة في السن أو less beautiful than before. فهنا she would tell him that she helped him to continue loving her in return. وده طبعا دي نظرة دونية من نورا لنفسها ان العادي جدا ان هو to keep loving her, مش لازم يكون في سبب to make him love her. لكن نورا مدخرة حتة ان هي انقذته to tell him that she saved his life in the past and he had to continue loving her when she became less beautiful and old. هنا نورا بتبتدي تحكي لمسز ليندي how she handled or tackled the problem of being in debt and how she paid up her debts. Nora saved some money from her allowance as she bought cheap clothes and she also got a lot or did a lot of copying to get some money to pay off her debts. يبقى نورا كان بتدخر الفلوس from the first thing from her allowance من مصروفها, saving half of it and buying cheap clothes. And she didn't take any money from the money of the household or her children. She had to buy them the best clothes for the position of their father. Nora took no money from the, the household and she bought her children nice clothes for her husband's position. يبقى نورا كانت بتحافظ على مظهر أطفالها وبتشتري لهم أفضل الملابس, ما بتاخدش أي فلوس من فلوس البيت, لكن كانت بتدخر half of her money and she did work of copying in order to save money to pay off her debt. Nora tended to daydream while talking with Mrs. Lindy. She told her that she imagined a rich old man who was in love, head over heels in love with her, and he would write in his will that all his money would go to Nora Helmer after his death. ده طبعا يا جماعة احنا بنقول ان نورا tended to daydream to escape from her financial problems. بتتخيل حاجات ومن ضمنها ان في rich old man write in his will that all his money would go to نورا هيلمر. وقبل كده برضو قالت لميسيس ليندي ان هي she borrowed money او one of her admirers lent her the money. طبعا كل ده كان imagination، لكن ميسيس ليندي ممكن تعتقد ان ده حقيقي. But now as her life would go better she wouldn't need that old man or his will. طب يا ترى نورا مستلفة الفلوس منين؟ بنعرف بعد كده ان بيظهر شخصية جديدة في الدراما بتاعتنا، وهو a new character or a man called Krogstad. Krogstad would come to the house of Mr. Helmer or Nora's house. Mrs. Lindy recognized him and knew him long time ago. He was a lawyer، وهو ده يا جماعة ال ex lover of Mrs. Lindy. The man that she left and in order to marry a rich man to help her family, her mother and younger brothers. This man, Krogstad, was a lawyer، كان محامي. His wife died and she left him some children. وبنعرف ان في شخصية تانية اللي هو دكتور رانك the family friend came out of Helmer's office to start a conversation with Nora and Mrs. Lindy. Mrs. Lindy came to town to get a job as I've told you. Dr. Rank described Krogstad، يعني كان ليه رأي في كروجستاد to be morally sick. هو شايف ان كروجستاد was a bad man and he was morally sick، يعني أخلاقه مش تمام. He wanted to find any point of weakness of people around them to exploit them. بيقول عن كروجستاد ان هو يعرف عنه ان هو he was a bad man. He wanted to find any point of weakness، عايز يجد اي نقاط ضعف في شخصية الاخرين in order to exploit، عشان يستغلهم and blackmail them. وده هنا تمهيد من الكاتب المسرحية انه يخلينا نقلق من شخصية كروجستاد، وان هو بيكون مصدر تهديد للاخرين، لان بالفعل كروجستاد هو الشخص who lent نورا the money، اللي مسلف نورا الفلوس، وهو اللي هيكون مصدر التهديد لنورا. ده في الاول، لكن طبعا زي ما احنا قلنا ان ال appearance might deceive you at the beginning, but by passing of time and by passing of instance you are going to discover something different from what you have got about the character. يعني ممكن في الاول الشخصية تخدعك، يبدو ان هو شرير، بعد كده نعرف ان هو انسان عادي، او شخصية تبان سيلي زي شخصية نورا، لكن مع الوقت نلاقيها responsible woman who saved the life of her husband and sacrificed everything. Nora thinks her husband has power over so many people and that makes her feel excited. وده اللي كانت بتتكلم مع دكتور رانك وبتوصله له. نورا بتبتدي ان هي she asks her husband to find her friend Mrs. Lindy any job, and she tells him that Christine is a widow and she is good at bookkeeping. Helmer promised to get her a job as he said that she came at no better time، لان هو كان بيعتقد ان ده وقت مناسب، لان he would fire Krogstad and his position would be free and there would be job opportunity for Mrs. Lindy. Mrs. Lindy left and Nora started to play with her children when Krogstad suddenly returned back to her. وهنا هيبتدي مصدر القلق يحصل لنورا، ان كروجستاد اللي كان جاي يقابل her husband هيلمر عشان يحاول يطلب منه not to fire him او not to dismiss him from the bank، واضح ان المفاوضات مع جوزها فشلت، فهو راجع يطلب من نورا ان هي to help him to be kept in his position at the bank and to convince her husband not to fire him. Krogstad asked Nora if she helped her friend Mrs. Lindy to get a job using her influence. Nora told him that of course she had influence. A woman couldn't have such influence because she was a woman. No, she helped her friend and she got an influence and helped her to get a job. Helmer would ask Nora now to use the same influence to help him to be kept in his position and not to be fired by her husband. He asked her to convince her husband to keep him in his job and not to fire him. And he told her that Helmer could be influenced like anyone else. فنورة طبعا became angry and asked him to talk in a respectful, more respectable way about her husband and not to talk about him in that bad way. Krogstad told her that he made a mistake in the past that blocked all doors against him, but now he needed that job. He would fight for it. He had children growing up, and he wanted to be respectable again in their eyes. He needed that job, and if he lost it, Nora would lose too. طبعا هنا ده تهديد صريح لنورا ان if she didn't help him he would reveal her secret, borrowing money from him, and even would destroy her as if he lost his job he would have nothing to lose and he would make her lose too. He wanted to start a new life, and that job was the first step to start a new life. هنا احنا ممكن نفكر في شخصية كروجستاد ان he had his own right somewhat الى حد ما هو عنده حق ان هو محتاج الوظيفة ديت. he wanted to be respectable in the eyes of his children. فبيقرر ان نورا had to use her influence to convince Helmer not to fire him. He would fight for his job, for his sons, as he wanted to be a good man in their eyes and to be respectable in their eyes. He told her that he committed the crime of forgery and he thought his job was the first step for him to start his new life again. Nora didn't want him to reveal her secret of borrowing money from him. She thought that they would get rid of him forever when her husband got the new position as a manager, as he would pay him the money and he would be away out of their life forever. Krogstad started to remind her of the circumstances of signing the contract, and he told her that her father died on 29th of September. How would he sign the contract 3 days after his death? The date of his signature was on the 2nd of October. Krogstad thought that somebody else wrote the date. هنا كروجستاد بيقول لنورا ان واضح ان السيجنتشر سليم لكن في حد تاني هو اللي كتبه لانه اتكتب 3 days after the death of her father، فاستحالة يكون ابوها اللي مات من 3 ايام هو اللي وقع على الكونتراكت او العقد اللي كان ما بينهم لضمان الدفع، واللي بيثبت ان نورا مديونة ليه بمبلغ معين. فبيقول لها ان your father died on the 29th of September and the signature أو the date of the signature وتاريخ التوقيع 3 days after his death on the 2nd of October. فطبعا في حاجة غلط. فنورا في الوقت دوت يعني was brave enough to tell him that even the signature was not her father's، إن حتى التوقيع ده مش توقيع أبوها، وإن نورا told him that she was the one who signed that signature أو that name her father's name، وده يعتبر forgery ان نورا هنا forged her father's name. Nora explained why she did أو she didn't send for her father أو she didn't ask her father to sign the contract because he was very ill, he was dying. She didn't want to shock her father and that would end his life. She wanted to spare on her father's life. Krogstad told her that she made a big mistake, the same mistake that he had done in the past, or he had made in the past, which was similar to his mistake. He made the same mistake, the mistake of forgery, or he did the same bad thing. He forged a signature, which blocked all doors against him. And Krogstad told her that law is not interested in reasons. Nora didn't think such law was right. How a woman couldn't save the life of her husband or spare on the life of her father. Krogstad now would threaten her and blackmail her that if he lost his job, she would lose too. Again, Krogstad threatened Nora that he would reveal her secret if she didn't help him. Then he left her. She was so worried and so confused. Helmer didn't want Nora to speak for Krogstad. He didn't like that person and he wanted to, or he had taken a decision or made up his mind that he would fire him. They started to talk about the fancy dress party. Nora asked Helmer about Krogstad's mistake. He told her that Krogstad made a mistake, but he didn't admit it. He told her that I'm not heartless to condemn a man for a single mistake, but the problem is that he wriggled out of it. يعني هو مشكلته ان هو تهرب من الاعتراف بخطأه. And they got away with it, يعني فلت من العقاب. That's why he couldn't forgive him. He told her that he lived in an atmosphere of lies and hypocrisy, and he was tricking everyone in sight, his family, his wife, his children. And he told her that such person, he meant or was referring to Krogstad, was poisoning and corrupting his children. Helmer told her that when people went bad young in life, the reason would be a deceitful mother, but in the case of Krogstad, he was the one who corrupted and spoiled and destroyed his children. Of course, such words were so bitter and bad to be heard by Nora. He asked her never to speak for such a bad person again, and never to defend him, and never to ask him to keep him in his job. بيقول لها ان طبعا Krogstad was a bad person, a depraved person who would make him feel ill. Nora was so worried now and was so confused. She started to think of herself, comparing herself to Krogstad. She made the same mistakes. She lied to her husband. She borrowed money without telling him, without his permission. She forged her father's name. She committed a mistake, or she made that thing that would be considered as a crime. She thought that she would poison her children like Krogstad, and she made a decision that she didn't want to poison his children and wanted to keep them away from her so as not to get poisoned or corrupted. She was so worried and frightened at the end of Act 1. Nora decided to keep herself away from her children. قررت نورا نتيجة الفكرة المسيطرة عليها ان هي ممكن تسمم اطفالها او تلوث شخصيتهم او تدمرهم او تفسدهم زي كروجستاد بالظبط. فقررت ان هي تبعد عن اطفالها لانها she took the idea from her husband for granted لما قال لها ان when children او people went bad young in life the reason is a deceitful mother. she thought that all his words were right and decided to keep herself away from her children وقررت ان هي تبعد عن اطفالها. She asked Anne Marie the nanny, the woman who looked after Nora when she was young. واللي في الصورة ديت هنفترض ان اللي على الشمال دي Anne Marie المربية بتاعت نورا, the one who looked after her when her mother died. واللي على اليمين معلش مجازا هتبقى نورا. فبتطلب من Anne Marie ان هي she wanted her to keep looking after her children. وبتسألها she asked Anne Marie if the mother went away from her children would they forget her. Anne Marie confirmed that children would never forget their mother, as her daughter, who was fostered or adopted by another rich family, never forgot her. On the contrary, she wrote or sent her letters when she was confirmed at the church and when she got married. Noura wanted Anne Mary to be a second mother to her children, the same way as when Anne Mary had been to Noura when her mother died. Mrs. Lindy arrived to help Noura fixing the fancy dress. They talked about the fancy dress party and Noura's dance, the Tarantella dance. Mrs. Lindy thanked Noura for making the house welcoming and for spending a nice night with them. Noura told her that Helmer always knew well how to make the house welcoming, and Mrs. Lindy confirmed that Noura was so generous, the same like her father. Then they talked about Dr. Rank, and Mrs. Lindy noticed that Dr. Rank knew about her, while Helmer himself didn't know anything. Noura told her that Helmer was so jealous and would never allow her to talk about her friends of the past. تقول لها ان جوزي ما بيسمحليش اتكلم عن اصدقاء الماضي، لكن انا بتكلم كتير وبدردش مع دكتور رانك. فهنا ميسيس ليندي بتحط في دماغها او بتتوقع ان نورا ممكن تكون استلفت او خدت الفلوس من دكتور رانك، او ان هو الريتش ادمايرر، او ان هو الريتش اولد مان. فنورا told her that it was imaginary when she didn't take any money from Dr. Rank at that time for two reasons. He was a family friend. It would be embarrassing to borrow a man from a man to borrow money from a man who would visit them daily. It would be very embarrassing as he was a family friend. Also at that time he didn't have any money, so he was not the one from whom she borrowed the money. Then they talked about Dr. Rank, who looked so ill. They talked about his disease that was inherited because of his father's mistakes. Noura told her that the father of Dr. Rank was a horrible man. He had different relationships with different women, and that caused a congenital disease that was inherited to Dr. Rank himself. Dr. Rank was suffering from the mistakes of his father. Noura couldn't take money, as I told you, from Dr. Rank for the two mentioned reasons. Visiting them daily, it would be embarrassing as he was a family friend, and also because he didn't have any money at that time. Noura heard that Helmer was coming and asked Mrs. Lindy to go to the other room, and that Anne Mary would help her fix the fancy dress party, or the fancy dress. Noura again asked Helmer to give Krogstad his job. He told her that his job was given to her friend Mrs. Lindy. بتحاول نورا ان هي تقنع جوزها ان هو يرجع كروجستاد للوظيفة, even if he would fire any other clerk from the bank. But he told her that he wouldn't do something like that. She asked him about the reason. He told her two new different reasons. At first he told her that he was a man who committed a mistake or made a mistake and he wriggled out of it or didn't admit it. He would give her two other reasons. لازم نكتبهم في الامتحان. The first reason was that he made it known at the bank that he would fire Krogstad. If he returned him to his job, they would laugh at him. They would make him a laughing stock. الناس هتضحك عليه في البنك. They would think that his wife interfered in his business. The second reason was that he was a friend, an old school friend, and they told her that it was a kind of friendship that anybody would regret later. He didn't like Krogstad, and he thought that Krogstad would deal with him in an informal way inside the bank, calling him with his first name, Torvald, Torvald. That would be embarrassing, and that would make his position so impossible inside the bank. At that time, Noura told him that he was a small-minded man to fire a person from his job for such silly reasons. Helmer now became so angry and asked the maid to come and give her the dismissal letter, give her some money, ask her to find someone to send the dismissal letter to Krogstad. لما نورا قالت له ان الاسباب اللي انت قلتها ديت اسباب تافهه وان هو small minded man، راجل دماغه صغيره، he became angry وبعت الشغاله بجواب الرفض ان هي تجد شخص يبعت الجواب لمين؟ لهيلمر، لكروجستاد. طبعا نورا was shocked. قبل ما تتكلم معاه في الريزنز طبعا she asked him not to fire Krogstad, or he would write about him bad things in some newspapers that he worked for. He told her that he was brave and strong enough not to be affected by such silly things, and he was not like her father who got ashamed before his death. من الواضح ان ابو نورا قبل ما يموت في بعض الناس يعني defamed him او سوءوا سمعته، فنورا بتقول ان هي خايفه لا يحصل معاه كده. قال لها طبعا he was more respectable than her father. The difference between you, your father and me, that your father was not respectable. بيقول لها ابوكي ما كانش محترم but I am، ولكن انا شخص محترم and such silly things wouldn't affect me. طبعا after firing or after sending the dismissal letter, Nora was shocked, but Helmer told her that he would help her and would support her, and whatever happened he would take the whole responsibility on himself. طبعا Nora misunderstood her husband in that situation, and she thought that he was a really good man and a good husband that would help her. And after that Helmer left Nora. She was worried and so nervous. Dr. Rank came and started to tell Nora that he was dying because of his mistake, of his illness, such a disease that he inherited from his father. He was the one who paid the bills for his father's mistakes. قال لها with this at my elbow for someone else's mistakes. He was referring that his father made so many mistakes in the past, having bad relationships with different women, and he received that disease from his father and that he was dying. ونورا بتحاول ان هي يعني to get him out of that sad mood, and told him about the party and the celebrations of the coming year and the preparations for the party and so on, in order to get him out of sad mood and to give him some hope. ولحد كده بينتهي act 2 until page 50. اتمنى ان يكون الفيديو helpful بالنسبه لكم، واتمنى لكم النجاح والتوفيق. شكرا. كان معاكم مستر سامح عبد الهادي، والسلام عليكم ورحمه الله وبركاته.